from Pocahontas, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about him. His name is George Jarrett, and he is from Northeast Arkansas, and he's an investigative reporter. Right now he works for Talk Business and Politics. He's worked for the Jonesboro Sun. He's been around for about 15 years after graduating from Lyon College. And he has a lot of inside and background information on several local crimes that were committed in this area, Northeast Arkansas. This book that he wrote, which is why we asked him to speak, involves 4 murders in the area. I think 2 were from Lawrence County, but 2 of them are from here. And so we thought it would be real interesting, since this book has just come out. It's called The Creekside Bones, for him to come and tell about the stories that he investigated, and they're murders that we know about, the Dalton murders, and then the gentleman named Travis Perkins, who died a couple of years ago, in where the old pool hall was up here at Pyburn, on Pyburn Street. But it'll be real interesting, I think, and I think you'll enjoy him. George Jarrett, he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met, and I think he's going to have a lot of interesting information. So I just wanted to kind of orient you all to that. That's going to happen next week, before we get this wonderful talk tonight that John's going to tell you about.
Hey, I'm glad you're here. We have Tom Barre tonight talking about the German Catholic migration. So enjoy, listen, and real quick, Carol, do you have anything to say?
My mouth is full of cookies.
Okay. Good.
Thank you. I'd like to open with prayer, if that's all right.
Sure.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this moment in history. We give you thanks that you are the Lord of history, that you know every hair of our head. We give you thanks for this court square, which is the heart of our town and the heart of our county. And we ask your blessings upon this county and the families and people of this county. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good. Immigration writers tell us that from 1820 to 1900, there was approximately 5 million immigrants flowing into America. I'd almost be willing to bet that a lot of our own Catholic people here don't have any idea how they got here, when you really think about it, the history of maybe how their families got here. We know that from around 1845 to 55, there was a big flow of Irish immigrants into America, as much as 400,000 a year. It was probably due to things like the potato famine and so forth. I went and tried to read hurriedly some on Germany and what all was going on in Europe a couple of decades later after that, and I can't figure it all out, but we know that there was a lot going on. And the unusual thing that we're going to talk about is this inflow of all these Catholic German immigrants into Randolph County in the late 1870s and the early part of the 1880s. The who, what, when, why, and where. I don't know where Susan Johnson is. She's the one that wrote these. She was going to help me out a little bit. She wrote these 2 pamphlets about the founding of Catholic Hill, the Pocahontas families here at St. Paul's, and then some of the Engelberg area families out there. When this influx started, the southern farmer Confederate slave states did not get a lot of these immigrants. I think they maybe stopped in the coastal cities, or maybe flowed into these northeastern states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and some of those places. But it is interesting to speculate about it. Eunice Oball in 1936, she was asked to respond to a project writer in Little Rock, and this is what she wrote. During the years 1879, 80, 81, 82, a number of German families came direct from Germany and settled in Randolph County. practically all of them were Catholics, and most of them intermarried with the other Germans, which is very true. They were thrifty people and prospered from the beginning. Most of them engaged in farming and truck gardening. The older ones still speak the German language. That's true because I remember as a kid being out at Grandpa Barre Baltz's house, and Grandma rose a bunch of, bunch of grandkids, 12 of us. 12 of those children, and we'd all be out there maybe eating, and if they didn't want to hear us, they'd switch to German, and so that was a good memory. She mentioned about 20 names. Mary Wiley Mundy in John Dalton's history, she mentions about 80. I think she mentioned the men, the husbands, and all the wives, and it adds up quite a bit, and some of them I can't even pronounce. Brodell, Reger, Schmidt, Junkersfeld, Frankenberg, Peters, Franken, is it Franken or Franken? Geyser, Wirtz, Jansen, Shippers, Gerhardt, Barre, Worms, Muyers, Meyer, Walter Sheed, Deklerk, Walters, Snyder, Barthel, and Thrush. Those are just, of course, some of the names of some of the settlers. If Harmon was here, I was wanting to kid him. He was talking about those early immigrants up in the Fochie River Valley, and I was going to kid him. I know he's not biased, and it's an ecumenical age and all that, but I don't believe he mentioned one Catholic family up there. Of course, he was primarily sticking, I think, with pre-Civil War. But the reality is there probably wasn't any. There wasn't any. The reality is that in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, there was only a scattered number of Catholic immigrants or families around. Father Weibel and his two writings, his two books they're just amazing original sources. He was, I think, in the 1890s talking to Mrs. Nolan, and she was telling him that they thought they were in there in 1811. There was a Robert Smith family. He also talks about two Bach men that lived here and had a big tannery. And it was an interesting story on that. They were here in the 1840s. So there was scattered Catholic immigrants, Spanish and French speaking people that were here, especially along the river towns, like Jacksonport, and Davisonville, Pocahontas, Black Rock, those types of things. He tells about the two Bach brothers. They had a third brother in Europe and a sister, and he finally decided to come to America, so he comes over. I think he comes down to New Orleans. He goes to Arkansas Post. Can't find anything about Pocahontas, or nobody knew much. So he comes on up to New Madrid, and they said, yeah, we know your brother's over there in Pocahontas. So he rides his horse over there, leaves his sister, and comes on over and joins them. His two brothers died shortly thereafter. He took over the business, and at the Civil War, Weibel says he was worth around $60,000, but it got all wiped out. But this Nicholas Bach became a real help to the first pastor here in Pocahontas and to Weibel. There, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, there were a number of priests from the Barrens or the Beaubril up below St. Louis or New Madrid that came down and ministered to the scattered people. 1843, the Arkansas Catholic Diocese was established. Of course, the state of Arkansas in the 30s, but the diocese was established, and there was only, I think they say, this writer that was this commission. History of the church in Arkansas was commissioned in 1993, and he says there was only about 700 souls in Arkansas. Harmon mentioned this was kind of a rural frontier area, Arkansas. It was a missionary period for a lot of the churches. I haven't read much on the Methodist Church, Baptist Church, and some of their early preachers. I'm sure it would be as interesting as Weibel's writings. Gosh almighty, they had a time. Pocahontas, I think, in 1850 or 60, had 200 to 300 people. The Methodist Church, Baptist Church, I think were pretty well established. It's interesting how much the Methodists helped out, and I'll read a quote here after a while. I've got I don't know if I got a handout, but there's a statistical page here somewhere I got out of one of the books. In 1860, Arkansas had around 334,000 people, primarily Anglo-Saxon Protestant population here in Arkansas. The foreign born at that time was like 3,700. 1870, maybe 5,000. Approximately 2,000 Catholics scattered around the state. In 1890, Arkansas had around 800,000, if I'm correct. Randolph County had around 13,000. That's quite a few. Not a whole lot of them in the town, but out in the counties, evidently. And at that time, the foreign-born percentage was like 2.3. It was very small. But out of that 2.3 here in Randolph County, 83% were German, Catholic type immigrants, Swiss German too. The bishop, the second bishop that we had was a guy named Fitzgerald. I think he was maybe out of Missouri. The first one was out of New York, of all things, but Fitzgerald, I think, was out of Missouri. He didn't want to take the job. He knew how rugged it was down here. And but anyway, right about the time he got appointed was about a year before Father O'Kane came and established the parish, and I want to kind of tell you about that. He had about 5 locations in Arkansas: Little Rock, Fort Smith, Pine Bluff, Helena, Napoleon, down by the mouth of the Arkansas. It eventually washed away, you know. But he did not have a priest or a minister here in Pocahontas or northeast Arkansas. He really needed one. The story about O'Kane is interesting. The riverboat ran, of course, from Newport up to Pocahontas, the boats, and some businessmen met this Father O'Kane. He was a Confederate Army veteran. It'd be interesting to know if he was here in Pocahontas when they were mustering those 10,000 troops and all. He was out of Memphis, probably, I think Andrew Wiley says he was educated in Ireland and came on over here. He was a missionary type, I think, but he was an unusual character. They invited him to come and give a talk, and I think, I'm not sure of the atmosphere of the frontier town, but I think people like talks and entertainment, right? So they got ready, and some people were opposing it, but anyway, the businessmen got to talk. He was fiery, he was good. They asked the bishop to sign him up here, and it got worked out, so O'Kane became the first pastor here, and within 3 or 4 years, he had 100 faithful, or souls, as they called them back then, and he did a good job. He got moved from here to St. Andrews, the Cathedral Church in Little Rock, as the pastor, and he was so well known, I guess, to the Confederate Army guys and whatnot, that they wanted to make him governor of the state. And I don't believe I have a picture of him. I got a picture of Wiley. That wouldn't have been appropriate, so they got that stopped, and so they made him the state chaplain for $600 a year. So that was a good deal. Now we come to Wiley. By the way, O'Kane, he established a cemetery in 1869. You know, Catholics were going to go out and bless that ground and put a fence around it and all that kind of stuff, you know. It's holy ground. This Irish wilderness, I don't know, that's an interesting little side thing, but O'Kane and Weibel, well, the Civil War wiped out that little experiment. There was a a priest up in northern Missouri that wanted to help some Irish people. They were poor and the land was cheap down, so he came down and set that up, but the Civil War wiped it out. But it's interesting because I wrote this gal or called her on that book, and we buried a lot of those Irish wilderness people down here, and they would come down here, but the priest would go up there maybe once or twice or 3 times a year to minister to them. But she acted like they didn't know where they all went, but they probably got absorbed around into the various towns and places. I want to read what Bible wrote. I did mention about the building of the church. The townspeople got together and took up a collection. I think many of you know this. And it was about $1,990, and it was mostly 95% of the Protestant people in Pocahontas. While he was waiting to get his church built, Rocky, the Methodist church was used or borrowed to let them use. Well, here's what Andrew Wiley summed it up. A Catholic priest using the Methodist church for his religious services, a delegation of non-Catholic men journeying to Little Rock to ask the bishop to assign that priest to Pocahontas, another committee of Protestants and Jews raising money with which to build a Catholic church. These are the remarkable facts that attended the building of St. Paul's Church, the first Catholic church in northeast Arkansas. Weibel wrote, the great-hearted men of the golden era of Pocahontas, most of them Protestant and Jews, deserve a grateful remembrance in the heart of every single Catholic in northeast Arkansas. O'Kane, he visited Jacksonport, Augusta, Corning, Pocahontas, Smithville, and Doniphan, places like that. Now we come to Weibel, and really the why of why did all of these immigrants hit in, and then doing all this rereading, I kind of think I figured it out. Borrowing on maybe some of the terms of the writers, there was kind of a push out of Europe. You might call it a push, and then a pull from Arkansas. The German nation, or Prussia, defeated France, the Franco-Prussian War, in 70 and 71. My ancestors, the Barres, lived in Alsace-Lorraine. It was taken over into Germany, or under German control. Then there was a depression in the United States and Germany in 72 and 73. The German people were pretty crowded. Then there was the Kulturkampf. By the way, this D. Clerk Smith genealogy has a good summary of all those reasons, things going on in Europe and Germany there in France as to why these people were leaving. Conscription was part of that whole thing. Bismarck and his Kulturkampf, his laws that they passed in 71, 2, 3, and 4, they kicked the Jesuits out, they shut down the parishes, they made the clergy take military service, the schools, you couldn't have a religious marriage anymore, you had to have a civil ceremony, things like that. And I think that's probably why my great-grandpa, Peter Barre, came over in 74 and 75 to New York, St. Louis. The 8th child was born, came down to Mentor, got off the train, and probably went to work for the railroad or in the woods, in the timber work. 2 of those, his boys, Henry, my grandfather, and Joseph came up here, and I think the big impetus there was to be close to church and school. A lot of these German-type families, they wanted to be close to church and school, and I would assume the same was true of our Protestant brothers and sisters out in the hills of Randolph County, except that in these rural areas there was distance whenever you lived rurally. a Jesuit priest friend of my son, one time he said, "Brett, you have geographic isolation, out there where he lives, and it's kind of hard sometimes to get to church, and a lot of people lose their religion when they can't have a minister nearby or a church or those types of things." So the problems in Europe was pushing them, and about that time, old Weibel was cranking up. He was a go-getter. He was out of the Benedictine order. His mother house was formed in the 900s, and one of their little branches was in Jasper, Indiana, St. Meinrad, and then Meinrad made a settlement over in Subiaco. So he said, "I'm leaving." And right after ordination, and in 3 years, he went New York, St. Meinrad, Subiaco, and the bishop happened to run into him one day and pulled him aside and said, "I need a guy over there in Pocahontas in northeast Arkansas. Would you take Hope or Pocahontas?" So he chose Pocahontas, and that was how he wound up here. And Lord have mercy, he saw immediately, and he comments on it, how rough it was. It was miserable. The swamps and the mosquitoes. Bishop Fitzgerald, he called that road from O'Kane to Pocahontas the worst road in Arkansas. And it's really interesting. Weibel, he was riding over from O'Kane, which named later. Oh, by the way, after O'Kane went to Little Rock, I'm sure he came back up, they tell us, to visit. And the conductor would holler, "O'Kane, O'Kane," to get off. There wasn't any station at O'Kane, they just holler his name. And so later they just named the place after him. And then, of course, Weibel worked the stations later, all the way from Roark, all the way down to Bald Knob. He would go and minister to the railroad, people working on railroads. But Weibel, he wrote a pamphlet about this time too, encouraging. There was a whole network of reasons why these people were getting pulled. Germany was pushing them out, so to speak, and they were being pulled by Fitzgerald or guys like Weibel that were. Oh, he was on the ball. He wrote a German pamphlet and said, "Come to Pocahontas." There was all kinds of societies, newspapers, the Arkansas Gazette, different forms of communication. St. Louis had a newspaper called America, K.A., America, in German language to try to get the people to come. This is a letter from, and I'm sure there was a lot of letter writing like this one, in 1881 from Peter John Frangenberg. "Dear brother and sister-in-law," won't read much of it, but there's a sentence or two in here I really like. "The area here is magnificent and fertile. The people are only too lazy. They don't keep any cattle and plow any fields. The cattle look after themselves and look good anyway. There are no cattle stalls here." Then he mentioned giant trees you simply can't imagine. And I know what that is, because I like to go up in the big woods and bogs and duck hunt. "In short, one lives more relaxed, more comfortable, carefree, and freer than over there. Nobody makes a fuss about whether one has more money than the other. Here is one." I need to get my glasses. "Here, such people must look the folk in the eye." No, wait a minute. "Here, one is not subject to the whim of officials or priests. Here, such people must look the folk in the eye. There is no obligation to go to school or conscription." I would say now that I don't want to go back, and even if it became 10 times better for us over there, I would prefer to be here. Doesn't that capture that desire for freedom? Freedom in all versions, Old Bismarck, he was an authoritarian tyrant type, and I imagine that, I never have been to Germany, I'm not a student of that kind of stuff, but I imagine their daily lives is pretty restricted. and he expresses that clearly. I would prefer to be here. The American frontier, you know, rugged frontier. The last sentence, but land will rise in price if the German farmers keep coming. Peter John Frangenberger. My grandpa married Frangenberg, a girl, and the other sister married D. Clerk, and another sister married Wirtz, and gosh, it's like Harmon said, we're just so double related, triple related. I never will forget, there was a salesman, after Dad moved us to Little Rock, salesman dropped by in the backyard, and he was talking, they got talking about the B.J. Tiedemeyer, because this salesman called on him too, and he made a remark about B.J. being a darn Jew. You know, and Daddy started laughing. He said, "Yeah, that's my cousin." You know? I have lots and lots of memories. I wish Harmon was here because I want to tell him about my love for the Black River and the hook nets and the trot lines. One of my favorite memories was Dad took me down there. I guess it was right down here where all of everything's away now. The river boats. They went down there. How many of you remember Tom Hatfield and his river boat? Tom Hatfield. He was a river rat, but his boat was up on dry ground. It's tilted. I can still smell the coal oil smell in that river boat. And Dad drove down, and Tom came out, and he went right out in the yard under a car seat, got a half a pint of whiskey, and sold it to Dad. I'll never forget that, you know. Of course, several nights I remember when we were kids, Mom would be up at 12 or 1 or 2 calling one of her brothers, or 8 brothers, to go find Vetus, you know. They were out running the nets and fishing and got too far down the river or something. You know. Yeah, let's see, where am I? Oh, we're right back to the point where some other reasons why they were getting pulled. The land was cheap, anywhere from 50 cents to $2. The better land that was already established, you might have to pay $10 an acre, but they got word that there was cheap land, and so that was an impetus. Of course, like Frankenberg said, the lack of conscription was an impetus of industry. Some industries would pay your fare all the way over to pay your train ride. And I just keep wondering if Peter Barre, he was a puddler. He knew how to do iron. And I just wonder if the railroad paid his way down to Menton. I'm always disappointed he didn't come on up here, but the two boys did. Railroads, they had their agents, they had pamphlets, well, that's another thing, railroads. I'm a collector of old duck calls, and I had to dig into the early railroads to get into the history of early duck hunting. Arkansas is really interesting, but at the Civil War, there was only about 38 miles of railroad in Arkansas. But the St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern Railroad finally got pushed through. They were building it in, say, 71, 72, and about in 73, probably the first train starts down. And that was one of the keys, the railroad systems, to, if you were coming over from Europe, how are you going to get from, say, St. Louis down into Arkansas, if that's where you want to come. A wagon ride would be a month or two. Oh, another aspect, too, about the 1870s and whatnot were the steamers, the transatlantic steamers. In the 30s and 40s, the paddle wheel steamers were really getting built and developed by, you know, those famous Germans over there and others in Europe. And then by the 70s and 80s, the propeller-driven steamers were really coming on, and so people could come over, maybe 8, 10, 12-day journey, and you're here. And then if you can get on a train and come down, boom, you're here. Okay. I mentioned Peter Barre. Out of his clan comes, you know, Aunt Aggie, the nurse for Dr. Scott, and Dr. Howe, Helen Jane Scott, and Karen, and all those gals and guys that like to sing. They were a big part. I think another thing that Weibel did when he got here, first thing he did, well, I kind of skipped that. he started the school. Yeah, let me back up. He started the school, and he says that he wanted to learn English, so he purposely started that school in 1880, and we've had one ever since. Different people helped him. He had a brother and sister came with him. He was from a pretty, I think, wealthy, sophisticated family. Liable. He spoke 3 or 4 languages and whatnot, but he was just he was a toughie. When we started that school to learn English, he told on himself where he'd go out and walk with a farmer plowing the field just so he could speak English, and try to learn. And a guy came up from Walnut Ridge one time, one of the laymen, I think, and said, "You need to get with it and get this English down." It's kind of like, I'm going to say this, but it's kind of like, it's really something. 125 years later, we've got ministers from Africa ministering to us, that we have a hard time with it. And now India, and it's a human factor. But in our tradition, father is father. He's the pastor, and we respect that, But and those people struggled with it, with Weibel. But it's just really fun to read him. They started coming. Well, there were some, like the Barres, that here a little early, but others started coming in 80 and 81. He must have got wind of a trainload of immigrants coming. He went up to Philadelphia and got with him and talked to 20 families instead of going to Fort Smith to stop here. And that was some of that big influx. But in the spring and fall of 80, there was a big influx. I'm going to mention the nuns. The nuns eventually took over the school. They were mostly German, Swiss German, but that's a separate topic. Would be interesting to talk about the work they did, because they just exploded. In 20 or 30, 40 years, they were teaching 7, 8, 10 schools in Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, and with all the good and influence that they brought to the communities. The colored school was started by Weibel in 89, had 36 pupils. It was the first started by Catholics in Arkansas. I've got a little picture here. Here's a couple of pictures of the rock work. Some of you may have seen these things in books and whatnot. Here's a picture of 2 of Weibel. He liked to have died several times. One time I was reading, he come back to Cherokee Bay, and he had malaria, I guess. He had hemorrhage, and he lay down for hours before he could get up. Another time when he was going up to Donovan, the carriage or whatever broke down, so it went on with his helper, and he walked back, and he said he barely made it. But he left and went to St. Louis. He went to Texas trying to beat the malaria. I guess that's what he had. The winter of 79, there was snow on the ground for weeks. The river froze over. Of course, the droughts of 80 and 81 like to kill these new immigrants. The townsfolk took up money to help them, and Wiley mentions 4, 5, 6 Huffstedlers and others that helped these immigrant families. They just didn't have a lot. They were in their little log houses, or sometimes they'd board at the bigger hotel, whatever, until they got their house place or farm. And so, again, Weibel recognized that kind of stuff in his writing, was appreciative. The Baltz family was one of the prominent families here that made it. The old man Baltz, the Baltzes were from Ohio. They came down, he and his brother, to Warsaw, Kentucky, Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. Here's the family. Dad on them. Tennessee. And George Peter Baltz, his brother, stayed in Lawrenceburg and was a big fan of over there. He walked all the way to Pocahontas in 79 and paid a guy to cross the Mississippi River. I was talking with Albert. I don't know if Albert showed up, but I said, Albert, why in the HELL did he walk all the way over here instead of riding on a train or something. I don't know. But it could have been for money reasons. But anyway, when he got here, he settled out west of town. 4 or 5 families, the Workses and others, settled near Nolan. He was 3 miles west. He had malaria for 9 months after he got here. Then he had 14 children. And here's the y'all seen a lot of these pictures. Kirby has one on that side. This is just being typical. And then the farm owner out there that he found 40 acres, he was about to die, and he said, you can have all my mules and stuff if you'll adopt these 2 kids. So they had 16, and that's an amazing family. It happens to be my family too. But gosh, if you look at the Teelemeyer pictures, here's these 9 Teelemeyer boys in a row. Things like that. All these rural folks had big families then, of course, but it's impressive when you go back and look at them again. John Barthel came over, the Barthels came over in '81. How are we doing on time? Pretty good.
Doing good.
Yeah, the Barthels came over in '81. She was a yogger, I guess. Nick Barthel is part of that history. Nick wound up marrying 3 times. It's amazing. Well, I forgot to mention that. It's amazing how many people died or children died, but wives died, and they just remarried again and got on with it. In '82, there was 12 adults and 11 children up here that died on the hill. I read somewhere in the past where the cistern up there at the convent got infected, I guess with, that would be cholera, right? Waterborne cholera maybe, and I think 8 or 9 of those novices died in 1 year. Holy cow. Weibel and others mention all the time about the swamp fevers, those types of things, and probably students of history, you're familiar with that, how tough it was. But these first settlers, wow, they ran out of money quickly, especially in that '81 drought. It wiped out the crops. Weibel went to work, and he got most of the men on railroad construction to help them through that period. But some of the townsfolk joined in too and helped them. Out of Nick Barthel comes, of course, Bill Barthel and the Pocahontas Lumber Company, and Leo helped manage it. We all remember that. I got in and around all those buildings. My dad, when he moved us back to Pocahontas, he bought building supply in the old Spinnerware building, so I roamed around all through that opera house. And then I also, in the summers while I wasn't in the seminary, had to go unload boxcars with 2x6s and 2x8s and bring it up to that building from all places. Bill Jones was part of that. Billy Barthel, we remember him. Pete Blissenblock, the Blissenblock family came over in '82 from Cologne, Germany. He married a Jansen. Bill Blissenblock, he had a furniture business, and I guess Pat can tell us all about that. And that right down there on the back of this square. Bill had a rodeo. That's interesting too. I think it was maybe that rodeo grounds was over where the Alpha Spike School is, I believe. So much detail I can't remember it. Of course, Lambert. We know Lambert. He picked up on the rodeo. I didn't know it, but Bill built that little rock grotto that's up there in front of the convent to sit there for years and years. Now we're going to maybe build a parish life center. And I don't know what will happen to that little grotto, but if we don't build one before long, I'm going to quit and join the Methodists. I don't know. Sometimes we're just lackadaisical and slow to get things going. Brodell's, 1880, they came to Pocahontas. They bought 40 acres over in East Pokey somewhere. And out of that bunch, there was a sister, Mary Eugenia. She was the first local girl that joined the convent, became a nun. John Brodell and Catherine Huckle. Hubert Brodell was out of that bunch of Brodells who, Adult Hubert became mayor of Jonesboro. Now we get to this big Baltz clan, and I've got to watch my time because not looking too bad. There's a picture somewhere of all those 10 brothers in their suits all lined up, and it's really an impressive picture. These guys, I remember most of them sort of, of course I'm out of one of them, the 14. John Joseph married a Noose woman, and we'll remember Mary Major, people like that, John, Ed, Baltz, so forth. John out on Mill Creek, he was the one that had 20 acres of fruit trees and maybe 2 acres of vines, grapes. And he was the winemaker in the big family. And I think Wiley tells how he enjoyed letting people taste his wine. Martin, Martin now, I think he still got some of the old grapevines from Europe. I think Martin still makes wine. I made it there for a while. I remember one time going to Dr. Baltz's house on Convent Street. I said, teach me about winemaking. He took me down to his basement. That was interesting. But he asked me, he said, Tom, how far down in your basement do you step? And I said, well, 2 steps. And he had me, it wasn't deep enough, cool enough to really, but I was getting those 5-gallon Mountain Valley mineral water jugs, and I had me 15 or 20 in a row. Of course, you buy that chemicals out of the store, and it's easy to find. He helped John Joseph. It seemed like every other one of them is named Joseph. I wonder why. John helped Charles Flowers on the rock work on the church. I think Flowers was the master stonemason. And then there were several others too. I think one of the Shekels, is it Shekel or? That's what you pronounce it? Shackle. There was several of those men that got good at stonework. And supposedly John Joseph did a lot of the rock work around town, when you drive around you see the foundation work. Somebody had to do it. I often wondered who, The quarry, I think just a little west of the church is where they got it. The second son was Joe Baltz, Franz Joseph. There you go again. He established a general merchandise store, and the home on Bettis was right back here, wasn't it? A big home. He established, I think, Pocahontas Lumber, was part owner, later Builder Supply. He was big in real estate and community affairs. John V. Baltz was come out of him, and I remember John Lamar. Some of you remember John Lamar. He married one of the Baltz girls. Then there was Anna Mara. She married Anita Cassess over in Lawrenceburg. She went, one of those 3 of the 14 went over to Lawrenceburg and married somebody over there. Catherine Katie Baltz married Ben Thielemeyer. BJ comes out of that clan and lumberyard that he had. Peter Paul, Esther, she married C.J. Wirtz. When my dad came back and bought Builder Supply, he took in C.J. Wirtz as the plumbing part of it. Builders Plumbing and Heating. And Peter Paul Thielemeyer comes out of that group. George Bill Baltz, we all know Bill, Uncle Bill, and the Wonder Horse, which made him a fortune. I remember riding on that horse as a kid. Some of us got to. He invented a lot of other things. People tell me that you go out to this farm and you'd have all kind of latches and things that would open gates. He was the Randolph County surveyor in 1917. He had other inventions. He made fans for attic fans. Billy Baltz, of course, comes out of that. Pocahontas Rose, I guess one of the first girls to be named Pocahontas, Isn't that beautiful, Pocahontas Rose? Pocahontas Rose. I like to, if I'm out of town for a while and I come back through town, I like to say, Rocky, a prayer for the court square. Something about this court square that I love, and it's the heart, so do that when you come in. We need it. Okay, Leon, he died in 1 year. Bartholomew Bartha is my grandpa. He married a Rosa Weisenbach. They had 12 children. My mother's the oldest. She's out at the nursing home at 101. She married Venus, and he's the one who had us. And his daddy, Henry, the Barre that came up from Intern, he fell in a well in 1912 before his daddy was born and died. And the Star Herald said that was the biggest procession they had seen. Oh, and that brings back another memory. Back in those days when we buried somebody, the altar boys, there was cassocks and the hot weather and all. Even when I was here as an assistant, I dreaded hot weather, or sometimes the cold winter. But I remember walking many a time through the woods to the cemetery. It wasn't real long, but it seemed long to a boy at that time. And carried him over and buried him in the cemetery. A lot of you, most of you know all these guys, James and Robert and Fenton and Hubert Stamel, and some of them that married all these 8 brothers and sisters. Fenton was kind of manager of Balt's Feed. Tom, that I was named after, was the manager of Balt's Equipment Company under A.J. Balt's, the owner. Of course, Andrew Jansen married Alice, and that was the Jansen grocery store. And now we have the change in times, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Beautiful Hart store. But when I drive by there, I think of that old Jansen grocery.
Oh,
Yeah,
we all
and the heck with the Hart store.
Exactly.
But they did a good job, I think.
Yeah.
It's laid out well. It's amazing. Then Al Baltz, of course, he was a farmer, and Pearl, he married a Krebs. We know some of these, Jack and Virginia and Dennis and Kenneth. There was a doctor, the 10th child was Dr. Leo. He was a dentist. He went to Texas. The 11th child, Antone Baltz, lived out on the highway. The little rock grotto still there. Beautiful pond back behind that we used to fish in. He and Ambrose went up to the wheat fields of Dakota in their young years, and they worked in the steel mill from Ohio, where their grandpa was from, or dad was from. And Anton started a soda bottling business. I didn't know that. Anybody know anything about that? Soda bottling business in 1921, he started a bakery. Later, he got into concrete business, and his boys went to Memphis. Some of them, Michael and Richard, and got good over there. Antone Jr. Worked his way up in the fire department in Memphis. Stephen, that's interesting. Well, there's 2 of them. Eugene went to Subiaco and became a priest and was quite a preacher in the Southwest. Later left, like I did, and married. Stephen, he went to Subiaco and he became the winemaker over there. And I would love to have gone over there. But some of these German Catholic immigrant families here, they sent their children to Subiaco for that good education. Then we come to Ambrose, Ambrose Joseph, there it is again. Aunt Anna, gosh almighty. Balt's Feed, he started out with the hardware, leather goods, and then he got to selling tractors, and it turned into Balt's equipment, the IH dealership, and then later autos. Of course, Junior Baltz, Rosemary, Bernard, Greg's son, Bernard's son Greg, they all come out of that. Paul Dean and so forth. And you remember some of those people. A couple of girls. Then there was Dr. Matt Baltz, the last one. He's the youngest. He set up the clinic right down here where the Palace Road, that building there, where Johnny D. Kirk had his. Well, the first clinic was by the old Randolph Hotel, wasn't that right back behind Futrall? Yeah, I remember being in that. Oh yeah, that's an interesting story. My mom worked for him as a nurse. He was quite a teacher. One time he pulled me in the clinic down there, some guy cut his tongue and he had me helping out sew up that tongue. That's the way he was. He was real down to earth. But Mom worked for him, and she started having her 6 kids, and if it was a boy, Dad didn't have to pay anything. If it was a girl, he had to pay $25. Rita and Guy and Madeline. Madeline married a thrush. Dr. Albert lives across the street from me, married a Teelemeyer girl, and here we go again. Interrelated. Doc Matt was well known. He was a good friend of later Bishop Fletcher in Little Rock. And, you know, for decades and decades, Pocahontas was kind of like I indicated earlier. This was like the 5th major parish in Arkansas, historic parish, and it was big, populous, and Dr. Matt, on that score of donating to the church, he overdid it at times, so I hear through family grapevine. But Dr. Matt was well known, and somewhere in one of these writings it lists all of his children and grandchildren that are in the medical world of some sort, nurses, doctors, psychiatrists and stuff, you know. He was an amazing man. I always called him a saint. Had a tremendous prayer life, Doc Matt, tremendous prayer life. Okay, D. Clark family. William D. Clark, here's the genealogy, beautiful stuff. New York, Pocahontas, married Mary Christine Franken, bought 200 acres. He was a farmer, miller, real estate guy. I think he built 4 brick buildings here on the square, had a grocery business, had the Black and D. Clark Saloon. Good for him. Hey, my daddy, in the late 40s, I remember, I must have been 5 or 6, he put in a little old beer joint. I guess that was after Prohibition came back in, or out, and of all things, but well, the women get mad at times. Then his second wife was Mary Barthel. They had, first one, marriage was 5, and the second one was 9 children. Joe D. Clark was an early prominent businessman. He was into political affairs and so forth. I think he moved to Little Rock and established the D. Clark Printing Company down there. Bernard Joseph, there it is again, Ben D. Clark. That's obviously after St. Joseph, Mary's husband, we know that. Ben D. Clark, that's quite a family. We all know that group. He married a Frangenberg, Catherine Anna Frangenberg, my grandma Barre's sister. There was Bill D. Clark, the painter, then Rayner, Father Rayner D. Clark, the first native son that became a priest, and he taught at St. John's Seminary where I went, taught scripture and stuff like that, and languages, and philosophy. George D. Clark, where I grew up down on the creek here, George had the first potato factory. I didn't know that. I don't know what a potato factory is, but
Potato chip.
potato chip factory. Yeah. Yes, Christine Million married Earl Million.
Yes,
How many know Earl Million and Rainbow?
my cousin.
Yeah, good. I remember the Rainbow. I remember Earl. I could tell stories about Earl, but the one is where he was trying to outrun the outlaws, or I mean the police, and they just found his car in the ditch. He came home and said, my car, somebody stole it. Fenton, I'm going to tell this, my Uncle Fenton, one of the younger of those 12 brothers and sisters, Fenton worked over there, young boy, and sometimes he said they'd put something under the napkin and potatoes on top and give it to the customers, Christine, Dr. Tom D. Clark, we all know him well in his old age now, his medical clinic. Then Johnny, of course, the pharmacist. They're just tough old, well, they're allowed to live forever, like my mom. I chatted her the other day, are you going to outlive us? Holy cow. Mary Catherine married Nicholas Barthel. That's where Bill Barthel comes in. And Joe and Leo helped manage the Pocahontas lumber, didn't he? I think. comes out, yeah, Ollie comes out of that bunch. He had, of course, the Declerk Gas Company and cattle and farming, and then, of course, Bill and David, and then, of course, Al out of Ingeberg with his thing, his cattle. The Dolmans, they were from Holland. He married a Worms woman. Several of her relatives came over and settled, I think, out on the Maynard Road.
62 West.
62 West.
Yes.
Oh, he came with the Peters family as a servant. Oftentimes, if you couldn't pay your way, you could get someone to pay your way, then you paid them back by working with them. The Dolman, he was a weaver, had fine clothes, so on. Mary M. had 7 children, married William Bill Stimmel, so on. Peter John Frangenberg, the writer of this letter, came over in the spring of '81, married a Schutler. He was a farmer all his life. Mariana married Pete Worse. Gertrude married John News. I remember, no, that's not what I was thinking. Anna Maria Frangenberg, one of his daughters, married my grandpa Henry Barre, and he's pictured in one of these pictures of the church. I passed those around. It's a rock picture. I think one of the Balch men was told there was an apple orchard up there, and they picked out this one apple tree, and that's where the sanctuary was to be. And they built that apse and altar area around that apple tree, and you can see it in that picture, the crown of that apple tree. And then he was finally told at the last minute, go up there and cut that apple tree, and it like killed him. Interesting story. My dad, Vitus, was Vitus Sebastian, Saint Sebastian, somewhere in Europe, cathedral over there, Saint Vitus. He was a carpenter, and he moved us to Little Rock. I hated it, but then he moved back and bought Builder Supply and Hardware and took in CJ Works with the plumbing and so on. Catherine Kate Frangenberg married Ben Declerk. The Frankens, Bernard Franken, he died 2 years after he got here. Mary Christine married William Declerk, so she was a Franken. Married Catherine, the 4th child, married Ferdinand Spinnenweber. It was written Ferdinand Philip Spinnenweber. Is that correct? Anybody know? I always thought it was Ferdinand, but it's like they've got 2. Ferdinand Philip. Anyway, then the Gaswin family, Henry Gaswin, they were from Switzerland. Came in here. Ann Carroll writes about him as a child, going by that shop over there by the McNabb Insurance Building. It's right in there somewhere. Maybe where.
A blacksmith. He was a blacksmith. Was he a blacksmith?
Yeah, he was a blacksmith. It was Henry Gaswin Blacksmith and Woodwork Shop, where the McNabb Insurance business is. He was a wheelwright. He built wagons and trailers. And she said it was something to see his muscles banging on stuff, when she was a girl. The Gaswins were tough. I remember my older brother Vitus got in a fight with one of those Gaswin boys when we were in school. He shocked me, you had to back him off sometime. Mott Gaswin married Martha Stimmel. They had 13 children. He took over the blacksmith shop. Ann Carroll said. The Jansen family, that's a big family. Lord have mercy. Martin Jansen from Germany. They came over with the Wirtzes. I remember old man Pete Wirtz coming up every day from the mill with a couple of buffalo or cart. And 100-something years later, my son Brett told me, he said, Dad, I didn't know buffalo was better than catfish. You learned something. But the townsfolk, they a lot of fish eaters. Their number one child was Peter Joseph. The old Jansen home was out by Sand Hill. Was a two-room log house, breezeway. He had the first brick kiln. He established a meat market, and then his son Peter Joseph, I think, took over that meat market later. Built a two-story building right here somewhere.
Right here.
Yep. And then it burned, and he rebuilt it, I think. I'd like to have seen that meat market. All this reading I've done recently, very little do I hear anything about game. You know, in my duck call research and all that, gosh almighty, all kind of talk about, you know, hundreds of ducks. Because I remember Dad coming in with 20 or so covering the kitchen floor. And, of course, one time he got caught for too many of them. He told that guy not to go back down to the bridge, and he did, and he got caught. The other guy squealed on him. Andrew Jansen married Mary Ann Noose, and that's where my Uncle Andrew, Jansen's Grocery, married my Aunt Alice. And those Jansen guys were fun. The old man must have had a heck of a sense of humor, but Andrew did too. The old Jansen store, he'd maybe bring my grandma Baltz a big old nice wrapped up gift out, or maybe bring Dad one, you know, wrapped up, and they'd open it up, there'd be a nice, good, dried up pig turd. You used to know what, well, you know Andrew, he had a good sense of humor and squeeze your hand off. Patsy Jansen, AJ's wife, comes out of that, Jansen Grocery. Frank had, I think Frank and Andrew were part owners on that grocery. Frank, I think, established a Turner Milk Company. Martin Jansen, I remember Martin Jansen. Of course, the farmer, truck patches, that old house place up by the old hospital. I remember picking cotton up there on that farm when I was a little boy. We just begged Mom and Dad, let us go up there, you know, 7 or 8, pull that sack, and I picked 32 pounds one day. Uh-oh, we're over, aren't we? Oh, me, I'm sorry. Junkersfeld family, they were out at Nolan, came over on Mill Creek. The Junkersfelds, this William, son of the old couple, he had 3 farms and 4 businesses. Junkersfeld worked with general merchandise. Then you have the Hollensteins were here. The Kiefers were down at Nolan. She was a Wahlberger, E-L-L. They had 15 children. Lord have mercy. John Noose, John Andrew, he married 3 times. Mary Spidell, Josephine Enser, and Gertrude Frangenberg. There it is again. He had this, one of those guys had the Silver Moon restaurant down here on the square, and so forth. Mary Ann, out of Gertrude, Bill Noose. Mary Ann was out of that bunch. Margaret's here. Where's Margaret? Mary Ann became the Mother Superior over at Jonesboro, right? And I got it half right, Margaret. Yeah. Then, okay, Peters, Hubert Peters, gosh, and the how do you pronounce it, Pat? Lesmeister?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hubert Peters married Teresa Lesmeister, and then Hubert, I was rereading that, he helped, they came from Columbia, Ohio. He taught in the school up there in those early decades a little bit. He was a young man. He was a bookkeeper and partner with Ferg Spinner-Weber General Store. Opera House, built the Opera House, is that right? Had the lumber business, Pocahontas Milling Company. Then I've got that picture I passed it around of Lesmaster up in the lobby of that, the attic of that St. Paul's Church. He helped, I guess, come up with those. They were called King trusses, whatever that is. He put in a steam boiler in 1912, and must have been a heck of a talented guy. And no telling what all he did here in town in various ways. The Frankenbergers, they were out. Their farm was out by where the Newberry farm was later. Eugene Frankenberger comes out of that bunch. Eugene was big on trying to figure out how the church was built. He put all this stuff together, big compilation of articles and things. I'm getting a little closer to understanding. I went to Little Rock once trying to find records, and I couldn't. The archives down there, I don't know where. Of course, Seidel, Father Seidel, that built that in the late 90s. I don't know where the blueprints are or things like that. You know, where did they get to? He was a Benedictine. He was a great church builder. He built like 35 churches in Arkansas. He was like Weibel. Weibel built, I think, or established 15 churches. I passed it around there, I think, that picture of Weibel. 7 schools, the convent here, 2 convents, and the hospital in Jonesboro got that started. He was something else. I'm sure sorry, I'm running over, and I didn't get to the Engelberg. Let me just mention quickly.
We got all right anyway.
Yeah,
Got
go
all
ahead.
right? Yeah. Find it. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna mention these names quickly. Now, you sure it's all right to go? a little
Yes,
bit?
yeah, go
All
on.
right, the Weisenbach family. My grandma Baltz was a Weisenbach, that was the mother of those 12. And they came in 1883. This married Anna Neef, N-E-E-F. They had 9 children. Anton Weisenbach was a brother. The church was built, I think, when was that Engelberg church built? 87? Anton, before it was built, it was in his house where the first church service was held by Father Weibel in the Anton Weisenbach house. And I think that house sat right next to the church, I believe. He married a Mary Eckstein. Their daughter married Henry Thielemeyer, and their 7th daughter married my grandma Rosa, married Baltz and so forth. Liebhaber, the Liebhabers were farmers. Joe, I remember these guys and gals. Helen Liebhaber married Ollie D. Clerk. Then out of them come Al and Judy and David and Billy that runs the gas company still.
Bob, and Bob.
Bob, yeah, Bobby. Yeah. The Zozo family were from Switzerland. Catherine Rommelfanger, he was a farmer. They settled in Engelberg. Then the Thielemeyers, gosh almighty. Anna Klein, they came over. Bernard Thielemeyer got here, and in 2 years he died. No, wait, excuse me. They came down to Corning, Ohio. He was killed in a coal mine like you see in that movie, and they carried him out of that coal mine on a stretcher. She came down here with her 3 sons, Henry, Will, and Ben, and she remarried Joe Bruner. And Weibel, somehow, I don't know how, he encouraged her to come to Pocahontas. I don't know how he was in contact with her up there in Corning, Ohio. That's that network probably of communication that we're not familiar with back
I
then.
thought he was friends with the priest up there, wasn't he?
He probably was. You know, the bosses were up there and how we just don't know all the network of communicating that might have gone on back then. Henry and Mary Weisenbach had 9. Will Thielemeyer and Lena Hausman had 1, and then he remarried Catherine Ungerank. They had 9. Will and Catherine Ungerank had 9 sons. I passed that picture around. 6 of them were in World War II at one time. Holy cow.
Wow.
They all served, all 9 of them served in the military, but 6 of them. And then they had 1 daughter. I mean, 9 boys, 1 girl. Ben Thielemeyer married Katie Baltz. Sister Mary Henrietta of the convent came out of that Minnie Hockle, Minnie and Joe Hockle. That's the first daughter of Henry Thielemeyer. Frank, there was Joe, Frank, George Thielemeyer. Most of these guys were outstanding farmers out in the Engelberg, on the Foce River. I wish Harmon was here. I don't think he's biased, except when it comes to the Foce River.
Harmon's not biased,
Yes, he
except
is.
when it comes to the Foce River.
Will Tiedemeyer, married, like I say, Lena Houseman, and then the second marriage, Catherine Ungerrank, 9 sons. They live near the Foce. Benny comes out of that. Leo, Tip, Raymond, Richard, Ed, Robert, so on. Of course, the Steimel family, he worked at Steimel 1852. They wound up in Tipton, Missouri. I think the one we're talking about here was the third son, Charles, in 1905. They came to Engelberg, and the church burned. Oh, by the way, there was a little old church built out there by Nolan, and I was always kind of given the hint that the bad guys might have burned it down. The church, I finally saw a picture of the church at Nolan, and it burned too, but I don't know. I read somewhere, maybe in Weibel, that people couldn't get along, so they just all left. Because there's no Catholic church in Imbo now, or it didn't go anywhere evidently. The Kochners, Henry Kochner was a brother to Charles' wife Helen. They came by wagon from Imboden to Engelberg. The Thrush family, that was part of those 20 families that Weibel intercepted up there in Philadelphia. They had 4 children. There was a Joseph Jerger. He was asked to come down and build he came down from Jasper, Indiana, and built the first church at Engelberg. It was a wooden church. He went out and cut and built the church, and then he left, and some of his descendants, I think, came down here. The Housemans, golly, what a big, I couldn't even cover it all. They had numerous children and clans too, and very prominent farmers. Let me wrap it up. I wish Susan was here, but she's a student of this. But the way I see it is they were, the writers say, Wiley and Dalton, Lawrence Dalton, that they really were something in terms of farming techniques. They revolutionized and really brought the farming industry along here in Randolph County. And the descendants are big farmers like the Coxes and some of the other families. But a lot of these, they were strong in their family life, their church life. They had that frugalness and discipline and stick-to-itiveness. What else can I say? They were just determined immigrants, rugged, tough, and they survived. And I'm just grateful to be one of their descendants. Stand here and talk about it. Questions?